Good morning. Glad that you're here today.
I'm also very glad we just sang that last song we just sang, because that's what our passage this morning is about. Fanning the flame of our faith to be a fire again. We'll talk a lot about that this morning. Glad that you're here today. So, you know what they say about 15 minutes of fame? I guess what they say is that everybody has it, your 15 minutes of fame. I'm not so sure that that's true, but I do know this, that for a very brief moment in the third grade, I came as close as I'll ever get to being a star. And the reason is because I landed the esteemed leading role in the third grade penguin-costumed, Elvis Presley-themed musical led and directed by none other than our very own Amy James. This is me right here on the left side for you. That's young Presley Penguin by unanimous choice as the only auditioner for the part. Thank you very much. And with that breakout performance began a 3-year period in my life when I would refer to myself and genuinely believe myself to be an actor. Now, did I do any acting? Not really. Did I study techniques or pay attention to theater at all? No, not so much. Did I submit myself to the training of a Drew Wiesner, Mr. Miyagi type theater teacher? No. I just believed in my heart that I was born for this, that I was born to be an actor. But then in 6th grade, something happened. I joined the theater group, my middle school, and for the very first time, I performed for an audience that was not just the parents of third graders who are going to give you rave reviews no matter what and take you to Baskin Robbins afterward. I performed for my peers, for 6th and 7th and 8th graders, and I gotta tell you, it was a whole different experience. As my knees stood there trembling, I came to a realization. Thinking yourself to be an actor does not an actor make. And maybe I could have become one. I didn't. But I wouldn't become one just by thinking of it. It was kind of an important reality check. Sometimes the way we see ourselves might not be exactly it. And that actually seems to be the problem in Laodicea, the last receiving church of our 7 letters to 7 churches that we find in Revelation 1 through 3. This is the last letter in our summer series of lessons. I hope that it's been useful to you. And what we have here is quite possibly the most memorable letter of all, one that gives us an image to hold in our minds that has been often quoted and applied today, and for good reason. Because in the last of these 7 letters, this church in Laodicea receives a much-needed reality check. A reality check for the life of faith, and most of all, for the heart within. Sometimes the way we see ourselves might not be exactly it. Let's listen to this letter now. It's Revelation 3 and verse 14. If you want to follow along in a Bible or else follow along on the screen. And let's listen to what this letter continues to say. Not just to Laodicea, but to you and me. So the letter says this: Now to the angel of the church in Laodicea write, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the origin, or in some of your translations, the ruler of God's creation. Of course, this is Christ himself. And he says this: I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing. You do not realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. Therefore, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white robes to clothe you and to keep the shame of your nakedness from being seen, and salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. For I reprove and discipline those whom I love. Be earnest, therefore, and repent. Listen, I am standing at the door, knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to you and eat with you, and you with me. To the one who conquers, I will give a place with me on my throne, just as I myself conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Okay, so what is the message of this letter? What is its message for you and me today? Well, what I can't help but see is that it serves for us and for them, the Laodiceans, as this giant reality check, doesn't it? Bringing them back to the way things really are. And it all starts with that bit early on about being lukewarm, which is one of the most famous lines in these 7 letters. I know your works, Christ says. You're neither cold nor hot. I wish you were cold or hot, but because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. Reality check. You, my dear church, Christ says to these Laodiceans, you've become lukewarm, and that's not what I wanted you to be. I wanted you to be cold or hot. You know, some have gone so far as to take this metaphor to mean that Christ would even prefer an unbeliever to a lukewarm believer. Of course, those who think this base that idea on the fact that he says, I'd rather you be cold than be lukewarm, half-hearted, in between. Is that what he's saying? Certainly would be a jolting shock. And maybe there is some truth to the fact that when it comes to being lukewarm, you might be less likely to see the problem, more likely to miss the reality check than someone who maybe is, not a follower at all. The lukewarm Christian may be more likely to just hum along in the comfortable illusion of faithfulness. Like we said earlier, the way we see ourselves might not actually be how things are. And yet, at the same time, if you ask me, when we begin to get into questions of what would be better, to be an unbeliever or a lukewarm believer, I think we're missing the real point here. This passage is not calling us to choose between bad options. And the analogy may actually even be much simpler than that. So you know how on a chilly morning or on a really cold night, it's just wonderful to brew a cup of hot cocoa or hot tea or hot coffee? Such a delight on a cold night. It's just what you need to warm you up. And you know how on a day like today will probably be, it's really nice to just have an ice cold glass of water or Dr. Pepper or sweet tea, and you may not even be a true Texan if that glass is not filled to the brim with ice. It's just a delight on a hot August day to have that cool drink to cool you down. A warm drink on a chilly day, a cold, ice-cold drink on a hot summer day. Those things are delightful, craveable. They're just so good. But then there are times like the other day for me, I was out for a run and I stopped at a water fountain by the trail in a public park, and by the time I'd had a drink of that water, I wished I hadn't stopped at all. It's just warm, tepid. It wasn't refreshing one bit. Not craveable, not good, just lukewarm. And to me, I think what these verses are saying are as simple as that. It's not about whether Christ would prefer an unbeliever to a lukewarm believer. Christ doesn't want more unbelievers. He wants more earnest believers. He wants more earnest followers. And if you were earnestly seeking me, if you were earnestly following me, Christ says, you would be to me like that hot coffee on a freezing day. You would be to me like that cold cup of water on a sweltering summer day. But as it is, dear Laodicea, you're not cold. You're not hot. You're like the public park water fountain, lukewarm. And it makes me want to spit you out, Christ says. Because Christ wants earnest believers. And apparently, it is possible to lose that sense of earnestness in our faith, to become lukewarm. Which, of course, makes me want to ask the question, well, then what does it mean to be earnest? And what does it mean, on the other hand, to be lukewarm? And I can tell you what my knee-jerk reaction is when I look at me and I read this passage. When I read a passage like this one, my first reaction is always, well, I've just got to do more. More activities, more involvement, more events. I need to be better and faster and stronger for Christ. And if I do more and I achieve more for Jesus, then certainly I will be hot and not lukewarm. Maybe there's something good about that reaction. Asking ourselves the honest question, can I do more for Christ? And how? That can be a good sign of an earnest heart. But you know what I also have to notice is that as this letter continues, we find very little about having more and doing more and achieving more. And it makes me wonder if maybe this passage is not so much calling us to more, but maybe to something deeper within us. Maybe this letter is not calling us to more activity, but more humility, more heartfelt love, more yearning for a deeper love for Christ. Because when you have those things, the actions naturally follow. And yet those things seem to be the missing pieces in this church in Laodicea. They are by no means have-nots when it comes to the external things. Putting on a good presentation. But when it comes to those inner qualities, that's where something may be missing. And so we could almost say that Christ's first question to them in verse 17 is, where is your humility? Where is your humble awareness? Because the way you see yourselves, it might not be exactly it. You say, I'm rich, I've prospered, and I need nothing. Yet you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. So you see how the church possesses this view of themselves, right? And what is this view based on? What they have, maybe what they've done or what they've accomplished. We are prosperous. We need nothing. Oh, how self-sufficient are we. Yet Christ says, things may not be as they seem to you. You're suffering from an internal poverty, a poverty of the heart. Suffering from a spiritual blindness. And you might actually need more than you realize. So maybe what this passage is bringing up to us is one of these ongoing dangers that can lead to a lukewarm faith. If we think our faith runs hot based on doing more and achieving more, having more, we might run the risk of not seeing ourselves very clearly at all. We may run the risk of saying to ourselves, we are prosperous. We need nothing. Oh, how self-sufficient are we? But of course, the cure to such thinking is a much-needed dose of humility, much-needed humble awareness, constant awareness that you and me, we desperately need Christ in every way. And we desperately need God's grace. Maybe this is why Paul will tell the Romans, in Romans chapter 12, he says to them, in view of the grace that's been given to him, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but instead to think with sober judgment. Remember where you've came from. For when we begin to think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think, we can lose that earnestness. We can lose that fervor. And even the things we do for Christ, they might even delude us, become proof for us that we need nothing. But with humility in our hearts, those same actions stir the flame within. They draw us deeper when you realize how much we need Christ. We come to him in a whole different way. And so the next verse in Revelation 3, Christ is going to say to his church, when you realize that you need me, you can come to me, and I will give you true riches, gold refined by fire. And when you realize that you need me, you can come to me and I will clothe you in white. I will clothe you in true dignity, in true purity. When you realize that you need me, you can come to me. I will heal your eyes and help you to see things as they are, so you can see how much every life depends on Jesus and his grace. You can come to me. I can make you whole. I can fan the fire of flame in you to burn brightly. But to the lukewarm Christian, Christ says, where is your humility? You say you need nothing, but things might not be like they seem. Where's your humility? And the other key question of Christ, where is your heart? Where is that heartfelt love for me? Has it become lukewarm? Because one thing is for certain, Christ's heartfelt love for you is not lukewarm. And we see it in every way. In fact, Christ even reminds the church here, and you and me as well, that even those reproving and disciplining actions of Christ, even those are because there is this deep, burning, abiding, heartfelt love of Christ for his children, even at their most lukewarm. It doesn't go away. And the flip side of that is the question for us. If everything Christ does is motivated by his love, will you earnestly love Christ in return? Will you be earnest and repent? Will you earnestly turn to him in your life in heartfelt love? You know, the first of these 7 letters, the key point of it all was not losing that first love that we have. The dangers of losing the utmost important love. Don't forget it or abandon it. And now as we reach the end of these letters, Christ is still asking, will you earnestly love me, just as I have done for you? Where's your heart? Where's your heartfelt love for Christ? And then the letter and the 7 letters as a whole, they end with this really lovely image. The image of Christ standing at the door and knocking. Perhaps the door of your heart. Calling and knocking and waiting to come in. Listen. I'm standing at the door, knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come into you and eat with you and you with me. There's a painting at Oxford in England. It was painted in the 1800s and inspired by these verses. I'm sure I'm not the first preacher who's mentioned it, maybe even to you. It's a painting by William Holman Hunt, and it hangs on a wall in Oxford beside this beautiful lush garden. I know that it can be hard to see in that picture there. But if you can see in that picture, we see Christ at a door, and he's knocking. Late into the night, he's knocking. You see his lantern there. And on his head, it's hard to see, but is a crown. It's a gold crown, but it's also a crown of thorns. An emblem of his humble and heartfelt love for you and me. And there he is knocking at the door. You might also be able to see there's some vines and weeds creeping up the door. Like maybe it hasn't been opened in a while. Perhaps your heart can be closed like that. And the last thing you might notice is something that many art enthusiasts claim was a mistake about the picture. There's no knob. There's no handle for Christ to come in. The artist later said it was no mistake. He wants you to know that this door opens from the inside. Christ is not going to force his way in, but he stands at the door and he knocks. And he calls. And if you hear his voice and open the door, Christ is more than ready to come inside. But it's up to you. It may be a matter of humble, heartfelt love for you to open the door to his voice. Maybe someone here today is ready to open the door of your heart to Christ, to listen to his voice and obey it, as he's called us in his word to answer the sound of his voice in the words of the gospel, which call us to be earnest and repent, just like this letter has. Be washed in his blood, given white, clean robes, and boundless spiritual riches when we're raised with him in baptism. Maybe someone here today, the door of your heart has been closed for a while, and it's time to answer his voice. However you may be called this morning, let's answer his call today while we stand and sing.